What's up, guys? A bunch of people asked me if I could create a breakdown or a tutorial on how to create something like my last posts, and I just decided to go ahead and do that. So let's start right off in DAZ. This is my DAZ character with clothing and skin materials applied. So we'll just go ahead and export that and choose just name. Those are my settings. So basically I checked use surface names under right groups, and under right surfaces I chose original maps, not collect maps. Collect maps will give you all the maps that are currently in the scene in a separate folder. That's not what I want, because I want the original location so I can have easy access to all the different maps like bump and normal. So you just go ahead and export that. In my case I won't do it since I already did do it. Let's head over to Cinema and pick our character. And in Cinema for the R21 it's a bit different. It used to be under splitting you had the option of combine groups, I think it was the name, and now it's basically by identical name. So you pick that and uncheck invert transparency, just hit OK. Let the character import. Now I'll just drag my axis to the neck because that's where I want to have the control, and just click on the Octane camera and make the character a bit bigger. We're not working in scale or anything, so that's fine. I'll just hit us with a quick 180 by 180, so it's a square. I just click this for a second, let it refresh in Octane. First thing what I'm doing usually is changing the focal length, because the default one kind of distorts your characters a bunch, which is normal since it's working like a regular camera. So I'll just show you an example. I'll just zoom a bit more in. Oops, my bad. Just zoom in. And then I'll compare. I'll store the render buffer and change my focal length to 80. Zoom out. So now you can see what I mean. It's always a good tip to just play around with well, not even play around with it. It's on portrait mode right now, and since that's what we want, let's just go ahead and use that. And first thing I'm doing is combining all the materials that are the same. That's usually my process. Sometimes it does work when you remove duplicate materials. In this case I think it did work. But sometimes you don't want that to happen because it can screw some textures up. So I'll just do it manually. Just press the Alt button, the Alt key, and drag the same textures into another. And that's a process we'll repeat for everything. So I think we're good now. What I usually do next is just convert them. Delete the old ones. Select everyone, select every material. Go under specular, choose white. Just drag the roughness down for our starting point, and I'll just go over here and grab a light so you can see what is happening. Oh, nice. There we go. Just refresh that. Okay. I'll do it a bit brighter. So what I'm doing next is either I delete those materials, or I just create a specular material and make sure that fake shadows are ticked, so you have light going through the material and not just you'll see what I mean in a second. Hold up. So I'll duplicate it by holding Command, and then I'll hold Alt, drag it into cornea, eye moisture, and the eye moisture for the eyelashes. Now it's black. We don't want that. So we'll click on the materials, go under common, and tick fake shadows. So now you can see the light is actually going through, and that is what we want. That's usually how I treat my DAZ character. You can, for example, delete what you don't need. So in my case it would be the legs, the arms, fingernails, and toenails. And then you can go from there. So I'm not showing you a step-by-step on how to achieve everything. I just break my scene down and kind of try to hit the most important things, in my opinion. So this is what it looks like right now, and you can already see a bunch of stuff is glowing, and going to there from our previous image isn't that complicated. In fact, it's just a bunch of simple materials. You can see that I have some stuff broken down. You can ignore the eyes. I just combine them, so I'm able to actually rotate them. And for preview purposes, I'll just disable the post-processing. Right off the bat, my camera is practically the same as it was before. It's 80 focal length, and under camera imager I just activated or enabled the denoiser to 140, as you can see, because I don't know, with Octane 2.19 and 1.3 I have the problem where I'll enable it here, change the settings, and as soon as I close it, it's back to default, and it's not happening under camera imager for whatever reason. So that's cool. And I'll start with the way this material works. You can see it on the face, for example. I have my face texture and I have the bump. In this case, this texture set came with a bump already, so basically that's not even the bump, that's the opacity, but I wanted to keep the skin smooth but still have the ridges, you know, up top being bumped in or out. So instead of choosing a bump, I chose the alpha texture, this one, the metallic one, and most of my materials are universal material, so you can go under basic. Instead of glossy, specular, metallic, you can choose universal. So when I go glossy, you can already see what's happening. We don't want this to happen, so we go universal, and my settings are, I crank the metallic up, so this is happening. And what drives most of the image is just a simple fall off map plugged into the film with, and I'll show you right here what this is doing. So I'll just create a chromey material, apply it to the sphere, and apply it to that sphere. So no, we don't want that. let's just take a look at the right one. And if we go into film layer, or in our case, let's just go universal for the sake of the other materials. If we go into film lower layer or film width, where is it? Here. This is happening. This will happen. So you can create this kind of iridescent material, but it's all over the place, and we do not want that. So what we're going to do is I'll copy the material and apply it to the other sphere and grab a fall off map and plug that into the film width. So now you can see what's happening. This is more like what we want. So I'll just drag it out, and you can do a lot with a fall off map. You can basically control the opacity, so you get something like this. You can also create like soap bubbles with that. But in our case, we just want the fall off map to drive the film width. That is what it's doing, and it looks simple here, but the more complex the object, the cooler the effect you get. So let's just go back to the big scene, and I'll show you how I set my materials up. So basically the torso and the face is the same, just with different corresponding textures, of course. This one for the face and this one for the torso, with the same fall off map in each object. You can see 0.21 and 0.59, and I have the mask split into dark and light. So you'll see what will happen if I just plug in the dark into the light. All the bright points are disappearing, and the bright material is basically the same as the dark one. This is not a universal material because it's just a regular glossy with the fall off map driving the film width without a bump map or anything else. And the diffuse is set to white, so if I were to set it to black, you get this kind of look. But I'll keep it at white. So we got some bright spots in the metal. And her crown, I'll put that in a subdivision, but it's basically the same as the torso and the face, with a bit more happening. We got the regular diffuse in the albedo channel, which is basically the diffuse channel, and we got its corresponding bump texture in the coating bump and in the regular bump. So what universal lets you do is put a layer on top of the original material, which is the coating layer. You can see what it's doing there. It got rid of a lot of shine because the coating allows us to give it extra set of roughness and an extra set of the index of refraction. So if I were to turn that down, we lose some of the metallic shine, and if I were to turn it up, it'll increase. And it's driven by the same maps that the original material is driven. So we got the bump and the normal, we got the metallic and the regular metallic. So if I were to remove that, you won't see much of a difference because it's very bright and no dark spots, but it does give us a bit more highlights. And then again, oh my bad, we got the fall off map, basically the same, driving the iridescent film width look, just not all across it. If I were to remove that, then we get something like this. That is not what we want because there's no film width right now being applied. I could do that, or I could let the fall off map drive it. Then I have the breastplates, which aren't really seen right now. I'll just remove the text for now. And because they're not seen, I didn't work the material, I just had it very much gray. There's just the regular textures in there with the color correction, removing the saturation, which I did for the face as well and the torso, I think. Yep, my bad, I didn't mention it earlier. And then we got the text. And how I got the text was, as you can see, I'm drawing it in Photoshop right now, which is not the ideal workflow. I could have done it in Illustrator straight off the bat, but decided not to do that. So I drew my sketch, just drew a more clean outline, copied the image over to Illustrator and traced it, and just saved the path so I could open it in Cinema. Just make sure when doing that you save it as a Illustrator 8 file. I'm not sure if R21 is accepting newer Illustrator files, but yeah, previously you had to save it as an Illustrator 8 file so Cinema could read it. And I'll show you right now how I usually go about with the text. Cinema R21 has a great new bevel function that works wonders for this kind of effect. So I'll just drag the text in, and usually what I do is I combine all my paths into one, but sometimes, and I have not figured out why that is happening, it breaks the spline. But for now I'll just center it and make it bigger, and I'll just show you what I mean. So let's copy that by holding Command and select all of them, connect objects and delete. And as you can see already, there are seams missing, and that usually should not happen. And like I said, I don't know why it does. Oops. Let's hit Shift C, extrude object, hit Alt, press Alt and hit it, so it's automatically applied as a child of it, the spliners. And now you can see we have a problem, and that isn't really good for us. So what I did was I just selected all of them, hit Shift C, pressed Alt and hit the extrude. Now we got this. So since everything is selected, you can just control every extrude object like so. And what I usually do is I'll do it like 2. Depends on the scene scale, of course. Then I'll hit us with an extended shape cap, bring the size a bit up, and then bring the height up, so we get this kind of look. So it extrudes outwards. You can also just use curve, which lets you do like a custom bevel. This is the great thing about R21, that you can customize your bevels finally, the extrude bevels. But then you can of course crank the segments up so it's a bit more smooth. But for what I did, I kept it at round, and that works fine. But playing around with the bevel options is a bunch of fun. Then, as you can see on this one, I have like a back text, so the chrome isn't colliding with the background as much. So I'll have a black material, which is just a black glossy with specular turned down a bit, and it's basically the same principle. I'll copy it, and okay, I'll have to close them real quick. select all of them. Check bevel outside, and then reduce the size and drag the whole text back a bit. So we get something like this. Of course, you can see what's happening. So I'll just put a material on this, make the scene brighter, and create a new, just regular white material, put it on there. So we have a bit of a separation going on, which works wonders. You can also do like a custom chain like this, for example, with the outside bevel being gold and the inside being studded with diamonds or something. There's a bunch of ways you can use the bevel function with the extrude, and that's basically it for the text. So I just put that in there. I have one backlight driving the scene, and the HDRI, of course, but I have one backlight behind the character, so it gets a bit more dynamic rim lighting, and it's just like a city street texture at 67, nothing major. Yeah, and then I keyframe the HDRI position, as you can see. I'll just go from -1 to 1 on the x-axis, and I keyframe the y-axis, so it goes from 0.65 to 0. Just made sure that the keyframes are linear. So what I mean by that is the x keyframes, sorry. If you hop in the timeline, you can see that my x keyframe is linear and my y keyframe is curved. I kept the x keyframe linear because it ends at the same point where it starts, and if I were to keep it a curve, then it would slowly begin and slowly end. So you do not have a seamless transition if you were to loop the video. That's why I kept it linear. You can also, when you open a new project, just make sure that you go into project settings, key interpolation, and hit it with a linear instead of spline, and then every future keyframe you make in that scene will be linear. I have my render settings at direct lighting diffuse, nothing major because it's a simple scene. We don't need a bunch of samples. I went with 200, specular and glossy depth at 8. You can see what this is doing in a moment, but I'm sure you already do. I'm just making sure that I cover even the basics for people that aren't into cinema yet and maybe want to in the future. So if we were to crank the spec down to 2, nothing much would happen because we don't really have specular materials in the scene except for the eyes. Let that stay at 8, and you can already see what's happening now. I put the glossy onto 0, and it's not as shiny anymore because the glossy materials aren't as deep in terms of catching color and light. So the more you increase it, the more light the material will catch and absorb. Same with the diffuse. And I found that 8 usually for stuff like this is a good number, so I'll just keep it at 8. I enabled static noise with 32 by 32 parallel samples, so the noise pattern isn't too random when rendering frame by frame. And I have nothing but so in the render settings I have Octane Renderer, of course, and I have nothing but the denoise beauty pass enabled. In render passes, just make sure you click enable. Nothing major here as well, just 8-bit depth and 8-bit here as well. PNG, make sure that you have frame 0 to or whatever, 0 to last frame selected, and then you can export it and get something like that. I'll just turn the post-processing back on so you can see what it's doing to the scene. So you go from there to there and then to there again. We have a simple loop, but it looks great. The text is not as readable, I am aware of that, but I just went with something that looks nice, not really readable, and yeah, that's what I did. So I hope you learned something from this. As you can see, it's a pretty simple setup actually, and I can't wait to do more stuff like this in the future with maybe even more complicated stuff. I'm not sure yet, but I just wanted to get this out there because a bunch of people asked, and instead of just doing a short breakdown video, I thought I'd just explain my thought process on doing something like this. Yeah, so stay tuned and I'll see you guys next time. Have a nice one.